People have asked me to watch this video. Captain Midnight, Hollywood has to change. Every stream I have like one little segment where I talk about the downfall of modern movies, and it makes me really happy inside. A lot of people are like, oh no, all these millions going to waste on these movies that are just performing terribly. This is so sad. Why don't we have anything nice anymore? And I simply look at the situation and laugh. In this age of absolute dog shit content being released, I can humbly say that the downfall of Hollywood is something that I am enjoying tremendously. Why is it that I have more enjoyment literally watching a YouTube video from some random dude sitting behind a keyboard than I do when I watch a blockbuster 2-hour-long, $400 million budget film?
Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Skillshare.
Yo!
In 2013, while on a press tour for his movie Lincoln, Steven Spielberg gave a fairly grim prediction while speaking at an event at USC, saying, "Be an implosion or a big meltdown.
All right.
There's going to be an implosion where 3 or 4 or maybe even a half dozen mega budget movies are going
This man was a prophet.
to go crashing into the ground, and that's going to change the paradigm."
And I will laugh. I will dance. I will pirouette on the tombstone of the fallen titans.
Now, the director walked back that statement a bit a couple years later, saying he wasn't predicting the whole industry would collapse. But I think this year, 2023, has kind of borne out
God, it's Indiana Jones and the Council of Cuck.
his main point. Movies like The Flash and Shazam! Fury of the Gods are crashing and burning at the box office.
And so did Elemental and Judy Gilmore Teenage Kraken and Indiana Jones. Everything not good is not succeeding. What? Wait a second. Do we actually have to produce something somewhat decent? What?
At an almost unprecedented scale relative to their budgets. With plenty of movies like Dial of Destiny, Ant-Man 3,
The Dial of Dysentery.
and Little
Yeah, Ant-Man 3 also kind of flopped.
Mermaid really underperforming as well.
Yeah, Little Mermaid! Oh, I will drink vodka over your tomb. I will have sushi and be thinking of your ass.
All that with the writers and actors striking simultaneously for the first time since 1960. All of that feels worth examining to me. How things got here, why the writers and actors unions are striking, and
Because clearly the writing is just too good. We cannot have AI write shows when we have perfectly good writing staff being paid to write Velma, okay?
probably most presumptuous of all, considering I'm just some guy on YouTube, my thoughts on what the future could look like going forward.
All right.
So
I'm
I feel a
ready.
little bad picking on it 2 videos in a row.
I totally disagree. This is something that I think the more you pick on it, the better. Criticism, if it's valid criticism, it should be given. That's my opinion. Listen. I am someone that gets so much hate and unvalid criticism, and some valid criticism too. I love getting valid criticism. It helps me improve. The random Twitter zinger is like, oh man, this guy's, he should be canceled. He's a racist, transphobic bigot. That stuff is cringe. But if you have valid criticism to make, bro, tear Disney a new freaking chart folder. Please.
Here, but Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is a great example of what's wrong with the film industry right now.
Okay, I could think of a few reasons why.
Creatively, sure, I talked about that already, but economically too. This is a movie that cost $300 million. $300 million. That's more than most Fast and Furious movies and roughly 3 John Wick Chapter 4s.
Damn.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull made money, and of course films like Raiders and The Last Crusade were huge in their day.
Because that was a freaking awesome scene.
And to be fair, I'm sure COVID protocols and all the stuff that goes
That is not an excuse.
with that really added to Dial's budget quite a bit. But it just seems a little nuts to me to bet that big on an action movie that stars an 80-year-old, especially when the character already came back for an underwhelming legacy sequel type movie.
It wasn't just about the idea or the IP, it's that you literally had to cripple this character to make it work.
You know, there was some appetite for a new Indiana Jones film. With a reasonable budget, its box office gross would be pretty respectable. But expecting it to make anywhere near like Force Awakens money just seems doomed from the start. And I know this is a cliche, but the largest studios have just been increasingly putting their eggs in a few very expensive baskets.
Yeah, because everything that people do today is just rerun IP. People love remaking. Dude, did you hear the shows that you've listed before? You just, before this started, you were talking about all the underwhelming movies, right? That came out, okay? You were talking about, oh man, The Flash failed. Shazam failed. Indiana Jones failed. Little Mermaid failed. You realize everything that you just mentioned is just rerunning the same IP that existed before. There is zero grit or anything new or original being created.
You look at Warner's release schedule this year, and it's almost all superhero movies, sequels like The Nun 2 and Meg 2, big IP movies like Barbie and Wonka, and even the lower budget stuff is remakes and sequels like House Party or Magic Mike: The Last Dance.
It's all about
Taken as a
sequels.
whole, it is an incredibly risk-averse lineup of movies, relying on the tried and true and not sticking its neck out for a single, truly original, non-IP vision.
That is incredibly based, and that's a lot of YouTubers fall into that same thing too. When a YouTuber gets a video to do well, so often they literally just keep remaking the same video again and again and again and again and again and again and again until it eventually dies because they know it'll do fine. But you always have to keep pushing the boundary, bro.
Ironic now that it features some of the biggest money losers in studio history.
Yeah!
This stands in stark contrast with the list of movies that WB released in like 1995. And really, this is not me just trying to say that movies were better back then or something. Like, two of their biggest releases, Batman Forever and Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, are both sequels that I'm not crazy about. It's more about all the different types of movies that they used to release theatrically back then. One of their highest grossing films of the year was Bridges of Madison County, an Eastwood Street romantic drama aimed squarely at the over 40 crowd. I mean, looking at all the major studio releases, you'll find a lot of comedies, rom-coms, dramas, and thrillers. Lots of the kind of mid-budget movies that aren't made for a theatrical audience very much anymore. A movie like...
I never really looked at this from the perspective of budgets as much as I looked at this from the perspective of no one's willing to take risks. Everyone wants to go the safe game. And, well, this has a massive IP, so I'm sure it'll freaking succeed.
The recent No Hard Feelings, starring Jennifer Lawrence, would not have felt notable at all 30, 20, or even 10 years ago. And now it feels like one of the mid-budget R-rated comedies' last attempts to hang on and survive.
I saw the trailer to this and it looked so bad!
Abandoning so many genres for just the big tentpole films has left what used to be theatrical audiences, especially those older audiences, without much of a reason to go to the theater anymore. Now, it's already hard in a post-2020
When's the last time any of you went to the theater? How many times do you go to the theater in a year? Once?
movie landscape to convince people to go to a theater, but by not even trying to serve the crowds that used to go to these movies, they've narrowed their audiences even more. And if you're thinking, well, I don't really care about legal thrillers or rom-coms, I'm glad the focus is more on big-budget superhero movies. I get it, but I
But why is the writing so bad, bro? But why?
honestly think this current system is hurting that stuff too. The MCU, by trying to appeal to the broadest possible audience, which it has to because these movies are so expensive, consistently feels like it's playing it safe.
Yup. Zero risks being taken. It's insane.
Some of these had tighter budgets, and they weren't all make-or-break centerpieces of Disney's lineup. They'd probably be a lot more unique and free to try new things that go outside the MCU formula.
They will never go against the MCU formula because that's the formula that's working. And why take a risk?
I know some of you may really hate the idea of a reduced budget, but like, Ant-Man 3 cost a lot more than Dune and looked much worse.
Damn, Dune actually was pretty fire.
Like, are these massive budgets
Doing your mom!
even helping making these movies better? Or is it just making them terrified to try anything new? So yeah, I think the major studios have tripled down on the biggest, most expensive moneymakers at the expense of nearly everything else.
That's fair.
And are finding out that that's not working out like it used to. Lots of people haven't gone to a theater since 2019, but if
I think since 2019, I've gone to the theater twice. I've gone for Oppenheimer and for Spider-Verse. I literally have not gone for anything else.
if you're an older moviegoer who doesn't care about superheroes or horror, there probably hasn't been a lot to entice you to go either, especially in terms of movies that have a real marketing budget behind them. Like, I'm really glad there's still distributors releasing lower budget films like A24 and Neon, but those mid-budget, widely accessible dramas and comedies disappearing from theaters, I think that's been a disaster for the film industry. And I say this as someone who loves...
Very fair. I didn't look at it from the perspective of all the budgets going into these massive, incredibly mid, watered-down, basic babyish movies. and not like making just a general lineup of stars here. I never really looked at it from that perspective. I always looked at it from the completely creativity devoid, soulless garbage they pump out purely because the formula works.
Both superheroes and horror movies. But it's not like those types of stories disappeared altogether, right? Like legal thrillers, rom-coms, and the like. They still exist. They're just more likely to be a streaming show or miniseries now.
True.
So what's the problem? Well, this won't come as a shock for people who've watched my videos on Netflix and Disney+, but I think the streamers have left the industry on far more shaky ground than anyone could have predicted back when Netflix Instant took off.
I think so for sure, because it's everywhere. It's literally everywhere. If you want to watch every show, you need a Disney Plus account, an Amazon Prime account, a Netflix account. You can't do that.
I'll get to the bigger picture in a minute, but when talking about the streamers and the strikes,
I think when these big studios are pumping out something that's a superhero movie, or that's based on a comic, or that's a remake, they see the name and they see dollar signs, and at that point they do not care what's in it, because it's like when you make a video with a YouTube video with a fantastic title and thumbnail. It's like literally the best title and thumbnail you've ever conceived. It is a title and thumbnail so good that everyone who sees it will click on it, but the content is shit. At that point, you might get a lot of initial views, but YouTube will see that you have no watch time on your video because everyone's clicking off and will not promote the video anywhere. That, in my opinion, is kind of what we're seeing here. They see the clickbait before they actually make the movie, and then they base a movie just off the clickbait.
Worth zooming in a bit and talking about how television production has changed. To illustrate, let's make up two hypothetical successful shows from different eras and compare what it would be like to be a young writer for each of them in very broad strokes. One is a 2000s network show, think CBS's How I Met Your Mother or Fox's 24, versus a recent streaming show, something like Hulu's The Bear or Netflix's Wednesday. On a 20-plus episode,
those were really popular. Wednesday was massive.
Network show, you're working between 20 and 40 weeks. And you're present in an in-person writer's room, ideally learning from more experienced writers and producers. It's likely you get a chance to go to the set when your episode is being shot, and learn a lot more about production from the director, cast, and crew. Maybe even sitting in on the episode's edit as well. Basically, just soaking up different aspects of TV production. And if all goes well, returning next season with more responsibility. Maybe a new title, like graduating from staff writer to story editor. Not only did this provide you
This is a lot more informative on the production side than I've really considered.
with stable income for a decent length of time, but it also taught you so much about production, essentially training the next generation of showrunners as writers work their way up the ladder. You also got residuals from reruns, so every time an episode you wrote shows up on Comedy Central or whatever, you'd get a check. TV is never...
It's interesting that he's like talking about this from incentive-based system for writers. I never really viewed the problem as really stemming from the writer's lack of incentive to create anything good. From my perspective, it was always just the big studios, when they get pitched, they want to get pitched something that they are already seeing the billions and bajillions. I think they don't care about the incentive that writers have, because they want, when someone says, we have a plan to make a movie, it's based on the incredibly popular IP Little Mermaid or The Flash. And then they'll be like, oh, goddamn, that's crazy.
Never been perfect, but this model was a sustainable way for writers to create television, where they both learned on the job and were able to make money
God, How I Met Your Mother was underrated.
long after they had retired, thanks to people still watching their work. Then,
That is true, though. I feel like, obviously, this entire industry is built off taking advantage of whoever you can, which is really sad. It's such a parasitic system, but... America! Let's go!
you look at a current streaming show where writers have talked about working in online Zoom-only mini-rooms for much shorter 6 to 10 weeks. There's a very good chance you're never going to set or meeting the crew during production. And even if you're on a successful show, it will probably only run a few seasons, with sometimes years between active production. Plus, basically every big streamer refuses to share concrete numbers with its workers, so
Damn, I didn't know that! What?
you don't really get residuals based on how well it's performing. You could conceivably write for a show as huge as Wednesday, but its success doesn't really do much for you on the back end.
That is so sad. Holy crap.
Sure, being associated with a hugely successful show is nice, but
Okay, dude, but we're not paying people an exposure here. This is their job.
financially, it may not even be all that different from writing for a Netflix show that gets canned after a single season.
What?
You're getting less production experience and getting paid less.
No shot.
And TV actors are seeing their livelihoods cut down in a pretty similar way. I remember reading Josh Peck's memoir a while ago and being kind of shocked that Nickelodeon actors don't receive residuals. I mean, anyone that watched Teen Nick back in the day knows just how much they reran Drake and Josh. He didn't see any of that money beyond what he got paid for initially filming.
That's actually kind of crazy. Holy crap.
That was a notably bad deal back then, and now it's a little bit more like the norm. Residuals on streaming shows.
Listen, I know that the pay for listen, I've never obviously acted, so I have no experience there, but I have been offered like voice acting work. The pay is kind of laughably bad. Obviously, higher, better voice actors, I'm sure they're paid more than I was offered, but like they wanted me to fly out to voice act, to fly back for like all that for a drop of clout. Am I right? Damn, I was very, very shaken by how bad the pay was.
Complex and vary from streamer to streamer. But one thing almost everyone can agree on is this: they're a lot less. This may not be a huge deal to really established stars who can ask for more money up front to make up for that, but that's far from everyone. Sydney Sweeney even said that she basically received no residuals for Euphoria on Max.
Damn.
Now, I know these are famous and well-established actors that I'm talking about here, but one thing that's important to keep in mind is that most SAG actors striking right now are not rich or famous at all, and often go months and months between
rich and famous people don't give a crap about what the peasants are doing. Are you kidding?
jobs, a time when those residual checks were really vital. Now, there's a lot of things in these negotiations, like AI, that I haven't even touched on here, but I hope that I've at least gotten across some of the broad reasoning behind these strikes. CEOs like Disney's Bob Iger and Warner Discovery's David Zaslav will of course say that now is no time for a strike, and that writers and actors are not being realistic about their demands. The thing is though, it was the executives, not the WGA or SAG, that decided
The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company just like, this is not the right time to strike.
to treat their incredibly profitable century-old businesses like 2010's tech companies to chase that short-term Wall Street high. Sure, no one could have seen COVID coming, but it wasn't COVID that made Disney dump millions of dollars into Marvel streaming shows that make less and less of an impact, and that now even Bob Iger says were a mistake. Executives from NBC Universal
I just got She-Hulk jump scared, goddamn.
to Warner to Disney and more made the choice to go all in on their streaming services, and for a while, it seemed like it was working. Many of them were being evaluated like the 2010s tech companies that investors couldn't get enough of.
Yeah, but like, Disney Plus shows are garbage though. Like, no? Any of y'all like Eternals? Any of you guys thought Eternals was good? What about Shang-Chi or Free Guy?
Even though that's not what they were, with the massive losses ignored because that stock price was always going up. But now, years into the streaming revolution, they're no longer the slick, promising future. They're mostly just second-tier streaming services that have never turned a profit. In deciding that their companies could all be like Netflix, studio executives let the Netflix model steer them off a cliff. So where does Hollywood go from here? Well, I'm not going to pretend to have the answer, but I will say that it might be pretty notable that the last time this happened was in the 60s. The 60s were a really rough time for Hollywood. High-profile flops were everywhere, with movies like Dr. Dolittle, Hello Dolly, and Cleopatra being extremely expensive and failing to break even. So many of the biggest genres of the time, westerns, war pictures, and family musicals, suddenly seemed to stop connecting with audiences.
True! Did you see that? It's when they started selling out and they were like, yo, every western's just gonna succeed. And then they're like, nope. That genre, you cannot just create something in a genre with a label that people would like and people would eat it up.
Who began to greet
I'm so excited for the future.
These movies with a tepid shrug. The moguls of the old Hollywood system were dying off or selling their studios. You probably know what happened next. Movies like Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, and Easy Rider helped usher in what was eventually dubbed New Hollywood, a youthful burst of creative energy that gave us directors like Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma, Francis Ford Coppola, and of course, Lucas and Spielberg. Now, it would be goofy of me to say that this is just likely how it's going to play out now, But I do hope some new creative rejuvenation comes out of this eventually.
It would be really
nice. That the cracks that are now showing so clearly in this Hollywood system allow for some really creative people to sneak in and shake things up.
That's what I'm saying. It has to happen. There is no way they'll just keep toppling.
Take risks on projects that we didn't see coming.
But when is the last time a movie, not based on any like huge franchise, when's the last time you even heard of a movie like that? When's the last time you were even excited for a movie like that? When's the last time someone told you, yo, have you watched blank? I literally cannot remember.
And those often come in the form of mid-budget movies that aren't connected to an IP, something studios rarely give young directors these days. Don't get me wrong, there's still great movies and TV coming out, like, of course there are. But 2023 really feels like a transition year for Hollywood, and I hope it eventually turns out to be one for the better.
Yes, it will.
As much as
it can't be for the worse. Well, what are they gonna do? Make worse superhero movies? Nah, they're not. Come on, give me.
Talk about huge Hollywood movies and shows on this channel. Something I always have a ton of respect for is the DIY, low-budget passion projects, whatever form they might take. If you're interested in making something on YouTube, one thing—
Skillshare! Crazy Shadow, thanks for the sub. And everyone, thank you so much for being here, watching and subscribing and following. I appreciate all of you tremendously.
Like, subscribe, and follow me on Twitch. Stay weird, fam!